The only certainty is change. Whoever authored that years and years ago, decades ago, centuries ago, maybe, they must have been a college football fan. They had to be a college football fan. Maybe it was written back in 1870 after all that changed from the original season of college football in 1869, then into 1870. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, everyone. Appreciate you all being here. Special edition here. Just in regards to everything that's being discussed, the landscape, the changing landscape, the opportunity, the takeover, the dominance by two conferences, the precarious state of the ACC, all that's going on. Florida State against the ACC, the grant of rights, the ultimate and certain dissolution of the grant of rights. All that's being talked about, the role of ESPN and Fox, the value of the programs, the rivalries, the regionality, the geography, the universities themselves, even academics may play something into it, although that's falling fast. It seems, it appears. So we appreciate you stopping by here at the Voice of College Football. And certainly this is something that we've talked about. I sometimes find it funny when I see comments and reactions out there. And certainly we didn't invent realignment here at the Voice of College Football. We were not the first to talk about it, I'm sure. I don't know that we weren't the first to talk about it within the realm that I see it out there, because we talked about it 10 years ago. And of course, there were realignments all over the place at various times, with Texas A&M and Missouri probably being the biggest shakeup in leaving the Big 12 going to the SEC. That was in 2012, was when they actually started play in the SEC. Nebraska leaving the Big 12 and going to the Big 10. Of course, the Big 10's moves out east to Maryland and Rutgers, what that meant, why did they do it? And then, of course, the Pac-12's attempted takeover and ultimate refusal to go back toward the Midwest and dig out of the Big 12 some valuable properties, which Pac-12 fans and Pac-12 administrators probably believe and hope and thought that they should have made those moves a decade or more ago. Texas to the Pac-12 could have been the death knell of the Big 12 eventually, and could have been the saving grace of the Pac-12, but that is rewriting history. We are here now, as somebody famously said many times out there, and a few people in my life that like to say, but we're here now. Meaning everything that happened in the past, it's good to review. We should learn from it. We should definitely learn from it. But it's all said and done. I would like there to be a Pac-12 conference to play football against. That does not exist, though. So we have to move on with what we have. And we are going to play the speculation game to a certain extent. So this is not something I major in. I know that there are outlets out there. I don't know exactly who they are, but I see them on my YouTube feed all the time that are talking college football realignment like every day. And that would be fun in some respects. It would drive me crazy in other respects. So we do it when we believe that either there's breaking news. Of course, we are here when there's breaking news, regardless of where in one facet of the game that involves, whether those are coaching changes most prominently, or certainly in the last few years, realignment. We are here to discuss and to break it down. And we are always in the analysis business here at the Voice of College Football. When we saw this situation transpire with the Pac-12, I wasn't here every day updating all of you and speculating, because most of that, let's be honest, 90% of that is just speculation. And it can be fun as long as it's framed that way, that this is speculation and not trying to be or trying to promote something that does not exist, or some type of set of sources or whatever. So I'm not in that game either. But of course, that became more and more prominent. It became more and more credible. It became more and more reality. And we covered it more and more as those things were set into place. And here we are with the Pac 12's demise, and bingo. So it's an interesting time here in college football because we have the rights, the privileges, the status of the players totally in the most insecure position that it's ever been, the most uncertain position that it's ever been. The opportunities afforded them, the future landscape of how the players are going to be signed, how they're going to be recruited, how they are going to have freedom of movement that we've already experienced over the last 3 years. All of that is continuing to change and will change because of legalities, because of player power, because of their value, because of, again, where the sport has grown so fast in such a short period of time that much of the sport was tied to the past and trying to operate out of a model that was outdated. And you could argue in some instances and in some factions illegal. And so we've got all this player related controversy, uncertainty to be sorted out. And it's not completely detached or unrelated to what we're going through with the football brands, the football programs, and their eventual construction, the structure, the organization of the sport, who's going to be able to make it and continue to play big boy football versus who's going to be discarded. Those things aren't completely. The second part of it is going to certainly play into the first part of it, the final structure of the sport, or the structure that at least lasts for a certain amount of time, is going to certainly factor into revenue distribution for the schools and the conferences that is going to allow for the structure of the player payments, the salary structure that we so much love to talk about here. And that's a video that's coming at some point in regards to how I would structure college football and how I would tackle these issues of NIL and paying players, because I think that it could be certainly handled much better going forward, even within the construct of, again, them having the rights and the freedom to move and the freedoms and the rights to be paid. All right, but we're going to stick to realignment here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Leave those comments and questions. Your super chats are certainly welcome. Thank you for that. More effective way to contribute here to the Voice of College Football: Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. You see that, I believe, on the ticker down below, and we so much appreciate your contributions. All right. My purpose for setting up this live stream was to basically go through the Power 5 conferences and maybe some Group of 5 conferences possibly, and look at candidates one by one and discuss their viability to be included. So I posted a video that I think was well received by many of you, so thank you so much for that. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. And I think it was, even though it was clearly stated by me, this is not a prediction. This is a possible landing spot. This is kind of a combination of possible realistic landing spot, but also what I would like to see the sport do to maintain somewhat of a regional structure, maintain the rivalries. And I built a 72-team league that involved the SEC with 24, the Big Ten with 24, and the Big 12 with 24. And a lot of people laughed and scoffed, and they misconstrued the purpose of that. It was not a prediction. That is not my prediction of how it's going to land. That is not my prediction. You know what? I don't have a prediction. I don't care to make a prediction. If you want to find some accurate predictions, check out my college football predictions. I can look at games, I can look at matchups, I can make high value predictions there. So we'll stick to the predictions game when it comes to uh, the college football games in the fall. If people want me to make predictions, I will say, as I see it right now, this is what I believe is most likely. And that will probably be part of today's discussion with all of you. But certainly a lot of it is just going to be simply, it could break this way, it could break that way, it could break the other way. And so um, the criticism that I took for that video, again, I don't think people necessarily listen to videos. So a few points catch them. And then, of course, they're going to be caught up by the graphics and look at the graphics. I was just putting that out there as this is a realistic landing spot that would also maintain the continuity and the integrity of the sport from a rivalry standpoint. So, again, a lot of people comment and they really don't know what they're talking about or they don't listen. All right, let's go through what I generally believe to be the value of these schools, these football programs, and let's look at it here. Man, I can think back to well before USC, UCLA leaving for the Big Ten, well before Oklahoma, Texas, and being asked, Mark, why would particular programs not be able to get into a conference? What are these conferences looking for? And it's a little bit more crystal clear to all of us now than it was then, but certainly back then, I have been touting this for years and years and years and years and years. And it's certainly coming to fruition when we see the television network's involvement. So if you want to check me on any of this stuff, certainly go back years and check out our live streams and our videos concerning realignment. And again, I'm not a prediction guy when it comes to realignment. I'll throw out some models, I'll throw out some takes on it. But in this particular case, involving the review of the schools and the programs, and what I believe is important, the one thing that I was throwing out there a long, long time ago, years and years and years ago, are the value of the programs as TV commodities, as media commodities, looking at these schools and these programs in that light and saying, regardless of what this team and this program is currently producing on the field, regardless of what you think their brand is, maybe all time, what are they bringing in regards to television value and the relationship of these conferences with their TV partners and the evaluation of all these schools and these brands and these programs based on their TV value, and the network being able to go to their partners and also just being able to do their own calculations based on what they know and being able to say, football program X, University X, if we add them to the Big Ten, if we add them to the SEC, what kind of value do they bring? And just in sheer dollars, do they add value to the conference or do they devalue the conference? Now, of course, on the surface, every program adds value. If that's all there is to it, just, you don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to split the pie. Another slice, just adding value. Of course, they all add value. People do watch football. Take what you consider to be the least popular football brand in the country. What would that be in the Power Five? Now the Power Four. Who would that be? The least popular football brand. Would that be Wake Forest? Is it Cincinnati? Is it Cal? I think I've hit on three of the lowest brands. Check out the videos that we've posted. So we did a series in which we compared the conferences, and we are recently wrapping up a series in which we are looking at each conference internally to compare those schools. And we just don't throw the numbers out there. We put it into context in where the games were played in regards to TV network and opponents and everything involved. And we take out the non-conference games, even though we certainly talk about them and show graphics with the most popular non-conference games for these specific conferences. But the best comparison is to see who's watching what teams when they all play each other. So we don't have an outlier where Duke plays Notre Dame on a Saturday night on ABC and they get a boom, 5.5 million viewer boost to their total. No, let's keep it internal to see who's watching. Now, of course, that fluctuates to a certain extent from year to year. However, it's pretty consistent. It's fairly consistent. Not as many people watched Oklahoma football 2 years ago when they dipped to 6-6, because that's not an Oklahoma type season. But still, more people watched Oklahoma football than watched a whole lot of other 6-6 teams because it's Oklahoma. I'll take a page from Tony Altimore because he studied the factors and the contributing components into the television model and what impacts viewership. And it's number one, it's the brand. It is the brand of that school. So even if Texas is having a down year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or close to 15 years like they did, their brand is still their brand. And yes, less people are going to watch Texas football when they are 4-6 in early November than when they are competing for a conference and national championship. Yes, absolutely. So it's first the brand, but then it's also the success of that team that particular year. TCU really increased its TV viewership and ratings in 2022 when they were on that run, playing exciting games, playing meaningful games, and they became a story. Of course, the ultimate outlier, I cannot think of another one. Certainly, if you can, I would like to hear it. We just witnessed this past season. Colorado, Coach Deion Sanders, ultimate outlier. They come out of the gate. He's the new coach. He's an all-time great player. He's a personality. He has celebrity friends. It's a great experiment. There are so many storylines. We could just keep going and going and going, but I hit on the main ones. It's a new team through the transfer portal at a new school that appears to be an odd match that nobody I can believe would have guessed years ago that Deion Sanders would be coaching at Colorado. And again, he brings celebrities. He has celebrity friends. They come to the games. They talk on the internet. They talk on TV. They hype up the games. They hype up the program. He's a talker. He's a natural promoter. You merge all those things together and you've got a TV darling. And then they win. They come out of the gate and they win. They take on the team that went to the national championship game the season before, and they get almost 8 million views for that game. Then it just rolls from there. Then they bring in Nebraska. They win. They play that ridiculous game against Colorado State. Colorado State, who would have said 2 or 3 years ago, Colorado and Colorado State would be one of the most watched games of a college football season? I believe if you take out the postseason in terms of regular season games, it was number 4 or 5. It was a top 5 watched game. Colorado and Colorado State playing at 10:30 at night on the East Coast. Not even a prime position to be playing. Incredible. So we know Colorado State brought nothing to the table in terms of viewership. The time frame in terms of kickoff time was working against that game. And then also throw into the mix that it was on ESPN, which is, of course, an enormous brand and is the flagship of the sport. However, the most popular games aren't typically played on ESPN because there's a big deficit there in regards to cable viewership versus over-the-air viewership. So that is just an aberration that I cannot compare to anything. Is that going to continue? Well, the Big 12 and Brett Yormark sure hopes it does, continues. I think it's reasonable to think, and this is where we can make a pretty good projection. It's going to continue at a much lesser rate. That's what's going to happen. Colorado has picked up fans because of Deion Sanders. Colorado games have picked up viewership because of Deion Sanders, and that will continue, but not at the level that it did last year. Not even close. I expect for their viewership to dip. It won't plummet. It's not going to be pre-Deion levels by any stretch. And then it's going to depend on the success of the team, of course. But early in the season, it really didn't depend that much on the success of the team right out of the gate. And then it got fueled by 3-0. And it was just a phenomena to watch. The Big 12 is in a bit of a hole when it comes to viewership going forward. And here in 2024, check out the video I posted. And of course, Colorado can be at the forefront of some kind of surge or maintaining ground in the ratings and the TV viewership. But Oklahoma and Texas took most of that with them for the Big 12. All right. So let's start with this premise. Is it going to be the SEC and the Big 10 solely? And we're going to have AFC, NFC, and they swallow up whatever they want? Or is there going to be some type of third conference that is going to be the core of the Big 12, and then whatever they can salvage to add to their value? And again, that's a difficult blank to fill right now. That is a difficult bar to meet because, again, going back to what we talked about for years here, when the conference and the TV networks look at an individual property, meaning a football program, an institution, and says, if we add them, do we add value? Well, of course, on the surface, you add value, but you've got to take away time slots from other schools. You've got to split the pie one more slice. Now, do they add value? Yes or no? Well, those commodities have been generally taken up. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, Oklahoma, Texas. Who's left on the table that definitely brings value? We can all name them, and we'll get to them in just a second. So does this become a model of Big 10 and SEC picking apart the Big 12, picking apart the ACC, taking a few of them, and then the rest, do what you want. You're not playing big boy football anymore? Or is this the Big 10 and the SEC, for lack of a better term, allowing the Big 12 to exist, strengthen itself after they've taken what they want, possibly strengthening itself? And certainly Brett Yormark has the vision of knowing, hey, football's where it's at. We need to be competitive in football. And he's made the moves to be competitive in football, at least in terms of depth, quality of programs, big time programs, talking top 30, 40 programs, not top 5 programs. They don't have those. Not top 10 programs. They don't have those. But we're going to kill this with depth. We're going to grab up territory, and we're going to stay relevant by taking up top 30 and 40 and 50 programs. Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado. A lot of Utah fans probably mad at me right now not calling them a top 10 program. You might have a top 10 team this year. You've had top 10 teams in recent years on that fringe. Talking about a program. I'm talking about a program, meaning the value of the program. Not talking about the roster or the football team. Talking about the program. Utah's not a top 10 program. And then there's the wild card of Colorado that the Big 12 has kind of fallen into, and hopes that that lightning in a bottle doesn't get away from them and that they can keep it burning for a while. So do the SEC and the Big Ten allow the Big 12 to have some kind of competition, to have a place and to piece something together that we're seeing the hints of right now, of course? And is this a first step in terms of what the Big Ten and the SEC are putting together and what they are pushing in regards to disparity of automatic qualifiers? Is this just a precursor to them, continuing to push them out, push them out, push them out, and then boom, we'll take what we want. You can have the rest. You can be the group of five, the super duper group of five, go. Or is this we're ruling the sport. We're allowing you to exist. You will exist. We want you to be decent, but you will not play with the same deck that we play. You don't play with the same deck we play. Therefore, we are not giving you the same place at the table. So we've got our 3 or 4 spots locked. You've got your 2. That's how we're going to play it. We are going to build a system that reflects our power, our money, and reflects what we believe is going to be the dominance on the field that's going to be reflected by the money disparity and the power disparity that we inevitably believe that's going to be reflected on the field. But we're still going to allow you to compete in this manner. It's kind of a supersized group of 5. The group of 5 in the 12-team playoff is being allowed to be a participant barely. One team out of 65 gets to compete for a national championship. Now, the Big 12 and whatever it morphs into and continues to grow into, possibly, if it doesn't get picked apart, that's a super model of a group of 5, let's say. And the Big Ten and the SEC have certainly given us indication in recent years as to how they value the Big 12, how much they value the Big 12 and the individual schools in the Big 12, which is not much. They don't want them. So I know certain models have been kicked around for the last few years about a super Big 10, a super big, super SEC, and a lot of Big 12 members being parts of that. And that, I'm not saying that couldn't happen. Again, I don't make predictions on these things, but I believe that the value of the individual programs has already been evaluated by the Big Ten and the SEC to say Oklahoma State, nope. Kansas State, no. On and on and on. No, we've gone after who we have gone after for a reason. So again, there are all sorts of configurations of where this could land. But the 2 basic ones are Big Ten, SEC, period. Picking apart the Big 12 and the ACC, and then letting everybody else play football at whatever they want to do. The super duper group of 5, play a playoff, do whatever you want. You're not playing with us. And what could be a completely pathetic result of that would be that on principle, this super duper group of 5, that's the current group of 5 plus what's left over of the ACC and the Big 12, they should by principle have nothing to do with the SEC and the Big 10. Nothing to do with them. We are not playing you at all. Go play a murderer's row for 12 games before your playoff. You're not playing us at all. That should be the move that they should take based on principle and integrity, because they just got snubbed and shut out of the sport. It's not even a snub. It's a snub times 100. They have been basically damned to the abyss. So that should be their response. We're not playing football against you. You cannot beat up on our teams in September to get the reps in before you guys go and play your conference schedules. But there's going to be too much money involved for them to say no. And so a Baylor that's left out of the Power Two and then is relegated to play in this super duper group of five situation and play for a second tier national championship should shun the Big Ten and the SEC to say, we're not playing you, but the paydays are going to be such that I got to think that they will. All right. So that's the first model, Big Ten SEC. The second basic model, again, there are a zillion variations. I should just post videos every day of all the variations in my head of how this could turn out. I've posted one. All right. Then you've got the Big 12 survives. The SEC and the Big 10 allow it to survive, to continue to play, as is being discussed right now, with a lower portion of opportunities, which would have been decided by the College Football Playoff Committee every year anyway. But I don't know if this is just a power play from the SEC and the Big Ten to say, we're going to make it formal. We are going to build the sport in such a way that it is structured to tell the masses that we are here and you are there. We don't even want it to be just assumed or known, or everybody just knows. Okay, SEC and the Big Ten are way up here and everybody else is down here. And that's going to be reflected by the College Football Playoff Committee and the selections every year. That's going to be represented by TV ratings and numbers. That's going to be represented by wins and losses and championships and out of conference records. That's going to be, no, we are going to officially say we're here and you're down here. So that is an interesting component here in this as well. Going to take a call in just a second. So I'm just going to I'm going to run down what these factors involve in just a second, but I'll just run them down real quick. So first and foremost is what we've seen over the last decade, and especially over the last 3 or 4 years with Oklahoma, Texas, USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon. Brand value, the value of the popularity of that brand and what it brings to the table in terms of media. That's number one. Number two is going to be the football program in regards to what is the current status of this football program? What has it been historically, and what could it be in the future? What is the potential of this football brand? Look at the AP rankings, the final AP rankings from last season. Every team outside of Florida State is in the SEC or the Big Ten now. There's an academic element to this, a university, a culture element to it that I think is not quite as prominent as maybe some had thought, or maybe I had thought. I never claimed to know any of this. I have ideas, I have thoughts, things are indicating certain presence to me, but like BYU would have never been accepted to the Pac-12. That's an obvious, egregious example. The Big Ten is not going to take on certain university. So there's a basketball factor that is limited. It's basically North Carolina, it's Duke. There will be some kind of basketball factor in there. Rivalries, they've been killed in the past, so they're not that revered in college football, unfortunately, but there is a sense to that. UCLA's football property and the status of its athletic program, both on the field and in regards to finances right now, is not in good shape, but they came along with USC anyway and got a full share from the Big Ten. And then I would love the geography to play into it, and it will to a certain extent, but obviously that's been obliterated. I did not realize we had some celebrity coming on here for our first caller. We got Big Game James Coleman. James. Hey, James, can you hear me? Hello?
I don't think he can hear you.
Hello, caller. Okay. I will send a message. All right. So we have left the link in the description section of the video. So go right ahead and give us a call. So let me go back through this because I kind of rushed through it because I thought we were going to the phone lines. So here we go. Yeah, the value of the brand, and sometimes this gets a bit mistaken. Sometimes this gets a bit confused by some people. And is there a correlation between winning and popularity? Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. But there is a bit of a disparity. There is a certain element to that is not congruous all the time. Notre Dame could go 5-7 for the next 10 years, and they are still going to draw many more viewers than any other school in the country, basically, that would have gone 5-7 for the last 10 years. And probably a lot of teams that go 8-4. So again, I think when there's an evaluation by these media companies to look at their brands, they're looking at sheer data of the television returns from these programs. But then they are also determining, okay, what is the potential here? Are there potential upsides to these programs? Or do these TV rankings and ratings, do they reflect this program maxing out? When we looked at the bowl viewership in the postseason, for example, when Alabama and Michigan get together for a national semifinal and it draws 2.7 million more views than Washington and Michigan for the national championship, that shows you something. 2 years ago, when Ohio State and Georgia draw 7 million more people than the national championship game, that shows you something. And of course, the counterpoint would be, well, people turned off the game because it sucked. And there is some truth to that. Absolutely. People tune into games because they're great games. They hear, oh, it's 31-30 in the fourth quarter. I'm going to flip over here. That's what we do. That's what college football nerds like us do. And then people turned off the national championship game 2 years ago because TCU didn't have a prayer. And maybe some people turned off Michigan, Washington in the fourth quarter because, okay, Michigan's got it. As opposed to games down to the wire. This is exciting. This is unbelievable. That's a bit of a factor. It's not as much of a factor as you would think it would be. There are tons of complete annihilations that rank through the roof because of the brands and because of the network. But when Michigan and Alabama draw 2.7 million more viewers than Washington and Michigan, and when Ohio State and Georgia draw 7 million more viewers than the national championship game, that shows you the Rose Bowl is a brand. The Rose Bowl is especially a brand, and I'm not talking about the playoff. I'm not talking about a playoff Rose Bowl. To me, that's not the Rose Bowl. It's a playoff game. So this past Michigan-Alabama game, I know it was technically the Rose Bowl. It's not the Rose Bowl. It's a playoff game. I'm talking about when the Rose Bowl is, in a sense, meaningless because the Rose Bowl is a brand. There are people out there that could care less about college football, and they know what the Rose Bowl is. And then if you put a brand in the Rose Bowl, so for example, Ohio State's in the Rose Bowl in 2021. Great game, close game. The viewership of that game was right in line with the college football playoff games. It was just a shade below the college football playoff games, especially the Alabama-Cincinnati game. It was right there. Why? Because the Rose Bowl is a brand and because Ohio State's a brand. Utah basically didn't bring anyone. I'm not saying anyone that people weren't watching because of Utah, but you could have inserted Arizona State, you could have inserted Stanford, you could have inserted Washington State, whoever that has played in Rose Bowls past. It was about the Rose Bowl, and it's Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So there's your viewership. So tons of great discussion there in the chat that I would like to get to. Please give me a call. The link, I should say, is listed in the description section of all of the video right here. So do we want to look at some teams? Why don't we do that? And do I know the destination of all these teams? No, I don't. I will continue to restate that. I'm not making predictions here. That's not what I do. I will serve up models and possibilities, but I'm not making predictions. I'll make football game predictions. So we talked about the SEC and the Big Ten taking the properties that are worth something. That's the ones that they've taken. Yes, conundrum. I know their value. Good point. I'm getting to that in just a second. I know their estimated value. Yes, exactly. Good point. I was getting to that. So we've got a pretty clear estimate on what all of these brands bring as football programs, first and foremost, meaning how successful are they on the field? Meaning, let me try to find the best example as I can of a brand that doesn't necessarily match the success on the field. Stanford 10 or 12 years ago. Yes, more people watched Stanford football 10 or 12 years ago because they were good. They had those amazing teams, Jim Harbaugh and David Shaw, and they were going to Rose Bowls, of course. But most people just watched those games because they were the biggest games of the week. And so people watched the Stanford games, but they did not watch them to the extent that they would have watched another team that was just as good. A top 5 Stanford team is not going to draw nearly the audience that a top 5 Michigan team is going to draw. Top 5 Ohio State team, top 5 Alabama team. It's not even close. But a top 5 Stanford team is going to draw way more people than a top 65 Stanford team that sucks, like what we've seen the last 3 years at 3-9. Conundrum. I hope you're not talking to me. I'm not being testy. I was backing up what you were saying. Yes, we know the value of these programs. I'm just saying that I don't know if this is all going to land. Let's take a borderline example. Virginia could be a borderline example. Their football program is horrible. It's horrible today. It was horrible 10 years ago. It was horrible for most of its history. Now, I didn't go back 30 years, 40 years, 50 years because they were pretty good. They were pretty good in the 80s. They were pretty good in the 90s. They were humming along at 7-4, 7-5, 8-4, 8-3 most years. George Welsh, those teams. And then once they got into the 2000s, boom. But they are one of the least successful football programs in the country. It's not even close. Look at their AP rankings. Go to Sports Reference and look at Virginia's AP final ranking. They go 20, 25 years at a time without being ranked. It's a terrible football program. And again, I'm going to offend certain people and Virginia fans that are going to then cite the Sean Moore team, the Herman Moore team. Yes, there are aberrations all over the place. Any bad football program, we can talk about Wake Forest in 2006, went to the Orange Bowl, won the ACC. Yes. We can talk about Duke and Steve Spurrier won the ACC championship in 1989 in a watered down ACC before Florida State, Miami, and Clemson. Yes. We can talk about Oregon State being really good under Jonathan Smith and being really good about 20 years ago with Dennis Erickson. Yes, there are all those examples. Somebody put Nebraska in the chat. Who put that up there? Doc, beautiful, perfect example. Perfect example. Nebraska fans, you can either be really pissed off about what I'm going to say and not mad at me because they're just facts, but pissed off at your school, your university, your football program, Scott Frost, and Mike Riley to a certain extent about what I'm about to say. Or you can take great pride in what I'm about to say because Nebraska is just incredible because Florida State's been down from about 2017 to 2 years ago. Texas, 2 years after going to the BCS championship game, 2011, 12, 13 in that range. Of course, certainly when Charlie Strong took over, but not horrible. Tom Herman went to bowl games. They finished in the top 25, but they had it down 10 years or so. We could cite a few other examples of like premium brands. Oklahoma in the mid to late 90s before Bob Stoops, down 5-6, 6-5, 3-8, down. Of course, prior to Nick Saban, Alabama kind of up and down in there, but Texas and Florida State are the best recent examples off the top of my head. And yes, they maintained popularity. And they maintained pretty full football stadiums. And I know that there's some pushback to Nebraska's sellout streak and how legitimate that is and how it's been maintained, but it's generally been maintained by the fans. They've thrown out some gimmicks here and there just to keep it going, yes, but their fan base has maintained that streak. That Nebraska operation, their fan support, all of that is ridiculous. It's incredible. They own the state. They probably own the region. I don't know if you go to South Dakota, North Dakota, Colorado, if you find Nebraska fans. I know you find Nebraska fans, but I don't know how far it extends past Nebraska. But they certainly own that state, unlike any other team in the country. I think I can say that. Yep, I can say that. They own that state, unlike anybody else in the country. Yes, Arkansas is the only big time program in the state of Arkansas. That is a certain example, but no. So Nebraska, if you look at their TV ratings, as we did this offseason and last offseason, if Nebraska ever starts to win, wow, look out. Because it's easy to see Ohio State's got a ridiculously large and rabid fan base, but they should. They do. And if they had a down period like Nebraska, I think we would see a similar situation, but they don't and they haven't. So those fans are rooting for top 5 teams in the country. And we see the same thing at Georgia, Alabama, etc. We see a situation like Clemson where their interest in their program, both internally in the state and also nationally, has exploded because of their success. But Doc, yes, Nebraska, they are an aberration. It's incredible the support that they draw, despite being this still just floors me when I think that they have the longest bowl drought of any program in the country. It's not Rutgers. It's not Northwestern. It's not Indiana. It's not Oregon State. It's not Wake. It's not Vandy. It's Nebraska. That's crazy. All right. So, conundrum, you framed it rather well. I don't know what's going to happen, but yes, we've got a pretty good gauge based on all the factors I just listed: brand popularity and value, football program level, both historically, currently, and potentially, academics in the university, basketball factor if there is one. And I know basketball is popular. I haven't watched a college basketball game in 10 years, but I used to cover it extensively. So I have loved college basketball in the past. And I don't want things to get confused here about basketball, because if you go to a place like Iowa State, their basketball program is popular, their basketball team is popular, but basketball has to be overwhelmingly successful, popular nationally to be a factor and move the needle at all. So we're talking about North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, Kansas. And I'm not saying that there aren't other places where it's going to be broached. It's not that it's not going to be discussed, brought up in the conversations, that this particular basketball program adds some value here. There was a lot of talk about the Big 12 going to get Gonzaga, but there's only a few programs that move the needle. All right, we're looking at the ACC. And in terms of the teams that are out there, I don't think there's any question. And I will certainly take a call, or I will certainly take comments in the chat if anybody can put up any kind of fight against Florida State, Clemson, and Miami. They are fine. They're secure. I understand their situation in the ACC is precarious. They're not happy about it. They're not making the kind of money that they would like to, and they want to get out. And Florida State obviously is leading that charge, but they'll be fine. They're going to have a landing spot, because for all the reasons that we've cited so many times on live streams and in our videos, I don't have to run down the football success, the popularity on TV, all of it. Yes. Florida State, Clemson, and Miami, safe. Okay. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum in the ACC, because I would say that the most unsure situations and the most likely to be left out would be Wake, Boston College, and I'm just spitballing this off the top of my head. Wake, Boston College. Purple Orca says Pitt. And Jason is throwing out Georgia Tech. See, I stopped there. Ed says Syracuse. I get that. They would probably be the next team out of my mouth. Syracuse is kind of interesting, because over the last 2 seasons that we've done these ratings and looked at the TV viewership, Syracuse does pretty well, considering they're no good and they haven't been any good for 20 plus years. When I say good, I don't mean 7-5 good. I mean doing anything on the national landscape. That they draw. Now, pair anyone with Florida State or Clemson in the ACC and their numbers go up. When Wake plays Florida State, 2 million people watch, 2.5 million people watch. When Wake plays Virginia and Georgia Tech, et cetera, then 800,000 people watch. So they always, everybody, all the bottom feeders in the ACC get the boost from Clemson and Florida State. However, Syracuse gets the biggest boost. And I think they also bring some of that with them. For example, when Purdue played Virginia Tech, bad example, it was on the Big Ten Network. There are examples of the other teams in the ACC playing each other: Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Duke, Georgia Tech, NC State, Virginia, all those schools. And they're going to get 800,000 viewers. It's almost like clockwork. It's going to be between 650 and 1 million. Throw Syracuse into that, and that number is always higher. It's always higher. So there must be more Syracuse football fans out there than those other schools. Now, whether that's enough to push them into the winner's circle, probably not. So at the low end, Wake, BC, probably Syracuse. And if Duke didn't have basketball, Duke, somebody brought up Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's an interesting situation. I did a video a couple of weeks ago where I looked at the 7 schools that I thought from the ACC that I thought had an opportunity, that had a fighting shot, that had a resume that at least need to be reviewed by the Big Ten / the SEC. And I included Georgia Tech. First of all, their football program's not as bad as we think it is. It's bad now. It's been bad. Paul Johnson left it in a bad place. Jeff Collins did nothing to fix it. And Brent Key, I don't want us to be fooled by 7-6 last year. They were a kneel down away from being 5-7 and not going to a bowl game, so therefore not winning a bowl game. So they were a kneel down by Miami away from being 5-7. So I don't know that Georgia Tech is net. There's a surface thought that, oh, Brent Key's doing a great job, which I think he is, considering what he was given, but that they've turned the corner. They went to a bowl. They won a bowl. They're 7-6. Let's see them build on that. So Georgia Tech, as recently as 2014, went to an ACC championship game and won the Orange Bowl. They went to the Orange Bowl in 2009. They, for the first 10 years of the ACC championship game, were going to as many ACC title games as Florida State and Virginia Tech. So you can win at Georgia Tech. And what would the fan support look like, both in the stadium and on television, if they were better? I can't say that I recall 10 years ago what Georgia Tech was doing on television in terms of TV ratings by themselves, meaning when they were carrying the ticket, not playing Florida State or playing Clemson. But there are a lot of attachments there that are, aside from the football, and even if the TV ratings don't back up their brand, there's a few things there with Georgia Tech that make them an interesting selection. They're in the heart of the SEC. So for the SEC, they're in the heart of the SEC. And you know what? For the Big Ten, they're in the heart of the SEC. They are in the biggest market in the SEC. Atlanta has, of course, grown by leaps and bounds over the last couple of decades and continues to. And they are in one of the most the best states in regards to population increase over the last decade or so. Georgia is going to pass New York in population soon. So I think Georgia Tech is an interesting conundrum. Says Houston greater than Atlanta. Do we consider Houston to be an SEC market? No, Atlanta's the biggest SEC market. And it's growing. It's thriving. It's not like if we were citing Big Ten markets and we said Detroit. Yeah, Detroit's a big city, but it's dying. Atlanta's thriving. So Georgia Tech's in Atlanta. Atlanta produces, along with Houston conundrum, the most NFL players per capita, or just the most NFL players of any metropolitan areas. Houston and Atlanta. It's a great recruiting. It brings to a certain extent to it for the Big Ten what I have targeted in Florida for the Big Ten and have said for years, even before all this blew up and we started talking about this because of OU, Texas, and the Pac 12 going to the Big Ten and all that. I've been saying this for years. Big Ten, go to Florida, grab Miami and Florida State, because this is the only thing that you don't have. You've got legions of fans. You've got the academics. You've got the football brands. You've got the attendance at the games. You got the eyeballs on TV. You've got traditions. You've got rivalries. You've got everything, Big Ten, but you don't have enough football players. So go to Florida and get Florida State and Miami. I've been saying that for 7 or 8 years. So this is a similar case, minus the football brand, minus the football team. And I don't know if Georgia Tech, when is the last time Georgia Tech truly had a really good football situation? I cited 2014, but that was basically Paul Johnson had a good football brand, had a good football program, had a good football roster, was chugging along 7-5, 8-4. And then they had one year where it kind of came together. And no, but for an extended period of time, when was the last time Georgia Tech was good? Really good. Bobby Ross. And I don't know that he sustained it. He wasn't around long enough to sustain it. So Georgia Tech is curious. And the school's outstanding. It's a top 35 school in the country. So Georgia Tech may be able to bypass its football frailty and its lack of brand value because of some other factors that are weighing in their favor. And in looking at these TV ratings that I've been putting out there, so check out all the TV ratings and don't be confused by, we've got a series where I named them Big 12 TV ratings breakdown, because I'm breaking down the Big 12 against its competitors in terms of a conference. And then the recent series, we looked internally at the Big 12 and compared all the programs in the Big 12. And you really get to see where Oklahoma and Texas are taking the viewership away from the Big 12 as expected. Yeah, Georgia Tech's a curious one. They're an interesting one. And shoot, I was on to another point that I lost. Oh, this is a great example of same matchup, different time, different network, not really different stakes, better football game, but this is how it changed. Georgia and Georgia Tech typically play on noon. They play at noon on either ABC or ESPN. That has been Georgia Tech for the last 10 years, mostly. And we know who else is playing at noon on the final weekend of the season. Ohio State, Michigan are taking almost all the views away from everyone. But there are still some good games that are typically played in that time slot. Florida State have played a lot of noon games. Like I say, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Kentucky, Clemson, South Carolina may play some noon games or some 3:30 games. And they'll have 1.5 to 2 million views. When Georgia and Georgia Tech played at night, and it's not a day-night thing, because Fox has shown that its big noon kickoff can be highly successful, and they have some of the most watched games of the season at noon. And even the ESPN noon games do well. And the ABC games at noon do well. So the whole aura of prime time, I don't really get. I get for the people at the stadium that want to drink all day and prime themselves for a night game. I get that. And it's more of a buildup instead of, oh, we got to get up at 8 a.m. and drive, get there, rush into the stadium for a noon game. I get that in terms of the in-person experience, but I never got the aura of, oh, it's a primetime game versus, yes, the noon games do just as well on TV. But when Georgia Tech, with its usual 2.25 million viewers, got moved to prime time and away from other attractive matchups, and Georgia Tech was just a little bit better, meaning they had earned a bowl spot by that point, that game got 5.3 million views. And it was a better game than what we've seen with Georgia blowing them out by 8 touchdowns a number of times. It was a fairly competitive game. Doc hates the noon game. Rather watch the great games early evening or night. Well, Doc, certainly you have that right. I watched the games that I believe are the best and the most competitive and at whatever time in the day. And MJ reminds us that would be a shock to all of us. Now, Georgia Tech did beat Kirby Smart's first team at Georgia in 2016. So back to our schools in the ACC. Top end, Clemson, Florida State, Miami. They're fine. They're good. They will safely land. It might be a bit of a rough ride. They may not get exactly what they want. There may be a preference in the room, in the boardroom, to go to the Big Ten, let's say, instead of the SEC or vice versa. My guess, my slightly educated guess would be Clemson is an SEC team. They're an SEC brand. They're an SEC school. Florida State, I would have told you 5 years ago, is an SEC school. However, because of some of their academic initiatives, their academic ranking, Florida State's, keeps rising. And they were on the finalist list for the AAU this past go around. That Florida State and Miami, I would lean Big Ten. I would not be surprised if they're playing in the SEC someday, but I would lean Big Ten 70-30 for those two. Clemson, I would lean SEC 80-10. Like that made sense. 80-20, we'll say. We'll go with 80-20. All right, these other schools in between. Now, Louisville. Louisville's got good TV numbers. Louisville's got a good football program. Louisville, NC State, aren't they the same football program? Louisville and NC State. When I look at Louisville's name and I look at NC State's name, I just think 8-5. 8-5, that's who they are. All those North Carolina schools, in terms of TV markets, are playing in a really good area of the country. Growing, thriving. Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Raleigh, Durham, all those North Carolina markets are surging, gaining popularity. And of course, North Carolina, they should be safe as well. They're safe. So I made the obvious choices of Clemson, Florida State, Miami. North Carolina's fine. They're going to be included. They would be next on the list. Basketball, the football program is usually good, and the market is thriving. The university's great. They've got all these factors going for them. Now, whether they land SEC or Big Ten, North Carolina to me seems a little bit more like a Big Ten school now in terms of part of the country. It's obviously more of an SEC school. but that's changing, of course. And can't you see some kind of consortium that gets added? The video that I posted a couple weeks ago, I had a South Atlantic division in the Big Ten that included a connection with Rutgers, Pitt, Penn State, Maryland, and of course, there's an ACC connection. North Carolina, you could see NC State possibly going with them. And that's going to be the interesting, one of many interesting breaks that need to happen, because it's extremely difficult to bring all these schools together. There's going to be splits like there was with Texas A&M leaving the Big 12 and leaving Texas to go to the SEC. They're most likely, it's going to be difficult to not split somebody up, to split rivals or pairings of teams or groups of teams. Duke and Wake is a rivalry that nobody really cares about, but it's out there. Of course, Duke, North Carolina in basketball in particular. And NC State, North Carolina, of course, they play on the final weekend of the season. All those schools have rivalries. It's Tobacco Road, it's basketball. They're the closest proximity schools of any schools in the country. More than two schools like USC, UCLA are close. They're like 7 miles apart or something ridiculous. But I'm talking about a group of schools: Wake, Duke, NC State, North Carolina. They're all right there. But it's very unlikely that they're going to go as some kind of package deal. Now, two of them may, or three of them may. Maybe it's North Carolina, Duke. Maybe it's North Carolina, NC State. North Carolina and Duke to the Big Ten. And NC State to the SEC would be my lean. That would be my lean. And absolutely, Taylor. North Carolina could fit into either the Big Ten and the SEC, and both of those conferences I would think would be head over heels to have North Carolina's brand. The football is decent, the basketball is great, and the part of the country is growing. The university's great. Win, 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 win all over the place. So if we're going to spitball a percentage of placement into an all SEC Big Ten college football world, if you have to join either one of them or you're toast, especially if you're coming from the ACC, if the Big 12 is able to survive, of course they would, I wonder how far they would dip into that pool of, if the Big 10 and the SEC jump into the 24 range of schools, and the Big 12 still sitting at 16, and there are some borderline schools that get passed up by the Big 10 and the SEC, how far does the Big 12 pluck up those schools? Obviously, their threshold of value is much lower than the Big 10 and the SEC. So they just looked at Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado and saw those schools and those programs as commodities to bring on. So they would do the same most likely with a man, none of those ACC schools really look like Big 12 schools, do they? It just doesn't. Wow. They would have to have almost like a satellite camp out there. It's not like they could pluck one of them. Although they got UCF, they got Cincinnati. They were certainly on islands and continue to be. There are some matchups with the West Virginia. They've got a long-standing rivalry with Virginia Tech that's been broken. With Pitt, maybe Pitt goes to the Big 12 and they renew their rivalry with West Virginia. One of the TV ratings numbers that stood out to me, not that I was surprised, but Pitt was awful last year. West Virginia had a good bounce back season, but at the time that they played Pitt, we didn't know that. They had already lost to Penn State. West Virginia hadn't proven anything. They played a unwatchable 17-6 game that drew 2.5 million views. Pitt and West Virginia, there is something there with the backyard brawl. Now, again, whether that's strong enough to bring a school in for one football game a year, let's see. So we've gone through. Okay. Our survival rate, and don't call me on these because I'm just spitballing. Survival rate meaning this school hooks up with the SEC or the Big Ten, or the Big 12 survives and expands and they find their way to the Big 12 in some way. Or the remaining ACC and the Big 12 have some kind of partnership and they merge what's left of the ACC, which could be about. And look at ACC now has SMU. You talk about a Big 12 school from a sports standpoint, from a geographical standpoint. SMU, Big 12, SMU, hello, they should be there. I'm going to give Boston College a 30% survival rate. Clemson, 99%, because nothing's certain in life. Duke, I'll say you can play big-time college basketball and be Gonzaga or be Villanova and not have any relevance in football or any attachment to any football conference. So there's a possibility there, but the school's so good too and so strong, and it's a brand. It's a brand way beyond Gonzaga and Villanova. That for Duke, I'll say that their survival rate is 85%. Florida State's 99.9%. Georgia Tech, I'm going to say 70%. Louisville, I'm going to say 65%. Miami, I'll go 96%. North Carolina State, they're an interesting deal as well. Now, the worst school, and I'll go with something that our buddy Tony Altimore states. These are all great schools, but they have to be ranked. They are ranked. And so anytime you've got a ranking, somebody's got to be last. Somebody's got to look bad. Anytime you have a ranking. I remember back, this has stuck in my brain, obviously forever, is a vice president once said about all the great directors at ESPN, not meaning directors in terms of executives, directors meaning in the control room that direct a show, that lead a show. Everybody's great that we have, but we rank them. Somebody's got to be number 20 out of 20. So Louisville's academic ranking is low compared to these other schools. Even Clemson is in the 80s. And I found it a bit strange that Clemson has dropped like 13 spots, which is difficult to do from the time that I went to the 2021 academic rankings. So check out the video to the academic ranking that I checked for 2024. Clemson had dropped from 75 to 87, which those rankings mostly are so secure in those schools that a lot has to change for a ranking to jump or decline that much. So I don't know what's happened there. But with Louisville, they're at 195. North Carolina State, again, that's a great part of the country, and their football program's good. Let's not overplay it. I think we get caught in recency bias. North Carolina State under Dave Doran. You can look them up. I have posted at least 2 Dave Doran videos in the past. I'm talking at least 5 years ago that were like, why does this guy have a job? He's winning 38% of his games in the ACC. They have a formula at NC State where they schedule no one. They go 4-0 non-conference unless the conference thrusts Notre Dame on them. And then they go 3-5 in the conference and they go 7-5 and all is well. But Dave Doran has upped his game, delivered better football results. His record against ranked opponents is awful. Slightly better than it was, like 1-17 at one point. But North Carolina State's a good football brand. North Carolina State is Louisville. I compared them to Louisville. North Carolina State, Minnesota. Texas Tech. Everybody else I'm thinking of fits that slot, except for they've peaked much higher. Missouri's peaked much higher. Stanford has peaked much higher. So NC State, I'm going to go, their survival rate is going to be, their rate there is going to be 60%. North Carolina's is going to be 98%. Pitt's an interesting one. They are on the fence. I'm going to go 55%, 60%. Pitt, North Carolina State, that's an interesting comparison. There are pros and cons there on both sides. Syracuse, it depends on how expanded this becomes. If you could give me a number, then we could have a final destination number of 72, 64, 48. Where does this land? We know at the very least it's going to be 34 because that's what the Big Ten and the SEC are right now. And we've not even delved into the possibility. And it's a very, very, very minute possibility because there's so many legalities to fight through and so much tradition and so much attachment. But talk about, we're looking at football programs and we're looking at universities that have higher value than the ones that already exist in these conferences, i.e. Rutgers, Illinois, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. They've been a good football program. I do not want them to be kicked out of the SEC, but some of these programs have higher value than Mississippi State. Yeah, Syracuse 40%, Virginia 55%. Great school, good part of the country. DMV, Virginia Tech, lower in the academic rankings, in the middle of nowhere. What was interesting about looking at Virginia Tech's television rankings this past year is they only played 2 conference games on network television. They played 6 games on the ACC network. So I couldn't even get a good read on their TV ratings from this past year because they only played Florida State and somebody else on ESPN. And then Wake Forest. Wake Forest is the least likely to make it. Sorry, Wake. I love you, Wake. I would love for Dave Clawson to be there for another 20 years and Wake Forest to go to bowl games and go 8-4 and do what they've done at their best in the last 5 years because I love it. I love schools like Wake Forest. I would like to talk more about Wake Forest, but nobody listens. Nobody cares. Think about this. Their enrollment is 5,500 students. So even if Wake Forest can get all their students to a game, they can only fill like a corner of the stadium. They really need support from the outside to fill the stadium. Yeah, Virginia Tech, they will survive. They will make it. But I will not be surprised if they don't. But I just have to think that football following that they have, the brand, the packed stadium, yeah. And they can thank, somebody mentioned it in the comments. Who was that? They can thank Frank Beamer for that. Rob, yes, they can thank Frank Beamer for them being able to survive in the next phase of college football in the new world. The new world order is going to include Virginia Tech because of what Frank Beamer did. If this was Virginia Tech football of the late 1980s, going 3-8, 5-6, 3-8, 4-7, nobody going to the games, nobody really recognizing that they even exist. But they joined the Big East. They went from independent status to the Big East to the ACC, and that's been the climb for a lot of those programs out there. They were independents. I don't know the ages of the folks there in the chat, but I think some of you are on the other side of 50 like me. You remember all these teams being independents. Syracuse, South Carolina, Virginia Tech, Maryland, Penn State, Boston College, Louisville, Florida State, being independents. All right. So that's how I size up the ACC. And I'm going to deliver another model here that is just the Big Ten and the SEC. And then I'll certainly take on the criticism for that, for people that say, no, the Big 12 is going to make it. They're going to survive. I get it. I'm just building a model to show you that this is a possibility, just like I did with the Big 10, the SEC, and the Big 12. And I had all sorts of people telling me, don't you see what's going on here? The SEC and the Big 10 are ruling the sport, and they're knocking all these other teams, and the Big 12 is going to disintegrate. So you don't know what you're talking about. I'm just serving up a model. I like that 72 team model. I really only had to break up one rivalry. If you go back and look at the video I posted about a week ago with the Big 10, the SEC, and the Big 12, 24, 24, 24, they are really sound leagues from the standpoint of geography, rivalries, kind of the new geography, rivalries, and balance, and the balance of the divisions. All right. Before we get to the Big 12, does anyone make it from the group of five? I find it ironic that at the very time in which the group of five is at its weakest, when the best programs, the biggest brands, the best football teams in the group of five have left, I'll include BYU, but Houston, UCF, Cincinnati, and now SMU have gone to the Power Five, that now the group of five is given an official spot at the table. So we take a strong group of five that was competitive at the very top in the New Year's Six games. Just look at the results. Houston won one. UCF won a couple. Cincinnati, of course, competitive with Alabama and Georgia. So we know what's happened over the last 10 years. So we've taken these teams that are the very best of the group of five, put them in the Power Five, and now we're giving the group of five a spot at the table. And unless Boise State really kicks it into gear, or San Diego State or Fresno State or Tulane, we could have some ugly playoff games. We would have had at least a shot at having watchable playoff games 5-10 years ago with Cincinnati, UCF, SMU, whoever, all those schools. But now without them in the mix, ugly. So the obvious football brand that could be taken from the group of five would be Boise State. Unfortunately for Boise State and all that they've proven over the last 25 years and how phenomenal the story of Boise State has been, there should be an ESPN 30 at 30 on Boise State football. The problem would be just like the problem with them advancing to the Power Five, the same thing with the documentary. Nobody would watch it. So not enough people watch Boise State. Now, Boise is growing. It's growing rapidly. It's all those defections from California. I looked at a couple articles about this when I was researching this for videos a couple months ago, and the growth rate of Boise is phenomenal. Their market size, just the growth of the metropolitan area. Oh, my numbers are going to be off. This number won't be off. It's gone up about 25% in 3 or 4 years. They have grown 25%. Now, is that going to continue? No, it's going to decelerate, but it may continue. They're not going to add 25%. It's like Las Vegas. It's just virtually impossible to keep up that kind of pace. But Boise State would be the number one candidate off the top of my head. Although Memphis and Tulane, I threw them in the SEC in my other model just to get us to 24, 24, 24. People had a heyday with that, raking me over the coals. Memphis and Tulane aren't going to the SEC. There's no way the SEC is going to take them on. I know that this is a long shot scenario, but I was trying to formulate it, not from the standpoint that it's currently being formulated. The current formulation of the sport is everybody just grabbing whatever they can get. The Big Ten grabs what it can get. The SEC grabs what it can get. And the other ones just try to survive. And that didn't work out too well for the Pac-12. That's not working out too well for the ACC and the Big 12. The Big 12 is safe for the time being based on its mediocrity. Big 12 fans didn't like to hear this a couple years ago when all this was happening with USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon, and then, of course, before that, Oklahoma, Texas, is that the ACC's in trouble because they've got 3, maybe 4 prominent brands that are valuable commodities to be picked off. So the ACC is hanging on to this grant of rights, and that's their ace in the hole, or so they thought, of staying together, at least, pissing off 14 schools for 12 years to stay together until 2036. But then it all falls apart, but at least they keep a conference until then. That was their hope and their thought with a grant of rights. But they've got 3 to 4 valuable commodities and maybe even past that in the ACC. So they're vulnerable. The Big 12's not vulnerable, not nearly as much, based on mediocrity. So the mediocrity of the Big 12, and I've been saying this for years, the mediocrity of the Big 12 has saved it. So the Big 12 can be thankful that none of its programs are valuable enough to pick apart and to steal. The Big 10 looked at the Big 12 and said, no, thank you. And the SEC looked at the Big 12 and said, well, we took 2 10 or 12 years ago, and we're taking your 2 that are basically 60% of your conference in terms of viewership and brand and equity. We're taking that from you. The rest of it, have a good time playing your Texas Tech Baylor games. And I don't say that to demean the Big 12. Those are just the facts, and that's just reality, because I love watching the Big 12. I turn on the Big 12 every week at some point in the day, on Saturday, on Friday night, on Thursday, if they have those games as well. I could run through all sorts of great Big 12 games that I've watched through the years. I could run through a ton of Big 12 games that I watched last year. I watch the Big 12. I watch everyone. But the national landscape is not watching the Big 12, and they will watch far less now that Oklahoma and Texas are gone. So the mediocrity of the Big 12 has spared it, has saved it. It's created a safe haven that their programs are just good enough to draw viewership and be big football brands and continue to play big time football, but not be so valuable that they get picked up. So again, Group of 5, Boise State, but there are so many negatives to that situation, but growing metro area and not the peak of their football powers. It would be better for Boise State if this was 19 no, sorry, if this was 2007, if we were having this situation, if Boise State was experiencing the growth that the area is, the metro area, and I think the school is taking some progress toward being a more respectable ranked university. But if this was 2007 in terms of football, beautiful for Boise State. They have gone from a lot of 12-1s to a lot of 8-5s. Again, Memphis, Tulane. Now, in my perfect world of college football, there would be a Big East conference that would involve Army and Navy. And I displayed that years ago, and I'll probably revamp that. There's SMU. SMU, the move that they made to the ACC, they may be a little bit smarter than others because they took the financial hit. They said, we just want to play big time football. We're this invested into playing big time football that we don't even need to get paid right now. But they also might have seen it as, we're going to be seen as a Power 5 team. And if this transpires, the soonest is going to be 2025. But if it lags on to 2027, 2028, well, then SMU is going to be an established ACC team. And if they play well, they're positioning themselves much better. And of course, they're in a great part of the country for football, even though nobody watches them either. That's crazy. They're in Dallas, Texas, and just nobody turns the games on. Nobody. Everybody outdraws SMU. Now, it's going to be fascinating to see when SMU's playing Florida State and when they're playing Georgia Tech or whomever else they play this year, what happens to those TV ratings. And they can pull some people that are Dallas Cowboys fans that can maybe stop looking at the roster on Saturday long enough to watch an SMU football game. But their TV ratings are deplorably bad, horrible. And what was funny about putting SMU up against the ACC, including them in my ratings breakdown, is that because they play almost all their games on ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU out of the American Conference, is that they had more of an inventory for me to evaluate, for us to look at. I think at the high end of the group of 5 would be, it's Memphis, Tulane, and Boise State in some order. And then I would tack on San Diego State. This gave us a look at the possible future and opportunity that San Diego State has, is that they almost were able to forge themselves a spot in the Pac-12. That was very close to happening. Those conversations were being had, and they're a viable candidate. They've got a new football stadium. They've got a great part of the country, great growing population base, Southern California, great recruiting. So San Diego State, Fresno State. I think those 5 schools are the most viable. Texas San Antonio is in a great part of the country too. Growing population base, metro area, and a football program that is taken off. But I'm going to go Boise State 1 because I think they would connect more readily to the Big 12 than Tulane or Memphis to the SEC or the Big 12. Well, the Big 12, those are all within the Big 12's range, of course. The Big 12 is a national conference now. It runs from Orlando, Florida to Tucson, Arizona. So actually, I'm going to go Tulane, Memphis, then Boise State, and then San Diego State and Fresno State as being possible group of fives that have a long shot opportunity. Long shot. All right, we are going to. I went on ESPN. This is taken from ESPN, so we got to give them their courtesy. However, if this was an all sports listing right here, then I could completely agree with them still having the Pac-12 schools listed as they do. But football, see, this is a football page. It's not a sports page for all athletics. It's a football page. Well, the 2023 season's over. We're going toward 2024. This should be redistributed. We should have the teams on the right. Colorado should be in the Big 12. Oregon should be in the Big 10, and so forth. Yeah. It's the way it should be. So, if the Big 12 doesn't make it, I believe the most viable brands are Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and West Virginia. Those are the programs that have the most sustained football success, that have the best football programs currently, have devoted fan bases, especially at West Virginia and at Oklahoma State. Yeah, I think there's been enough sustained success at all of those schools. You know, we're going back decades that they've been good football programs, that they could make their way if the Big 12 crumbles. The wild card. Who do you all think that I see as the wild card in the Big 12? Wild card in a positive way. And I touted this school years ago. And I don't want to tell you what conference that I told this conference. I didn't get on the phone with the conference commissioner, but I said it here that this conference, and it's coming home to roost because of this conference being in trouble now. This conference should go after that school because that school and that football program has so much potential because of where they're located, what corporations are located there, what recruiting's located there, the size of the city. The alumni base is through the roof. Keep going. Nobody's got it yet. The alumni base. It's a huge school. It's in a destination location. Bingo! Wet blanket got it. I've been touting this forever. I built an ACC model like in 2014 or 15 and said, go get UCF. ACC, you should get UCF. Look at how they're playing football right now. So we're seeing that they can play football. And I actually watched watched one of UCF's first college football games playing big time college football. Dante Culpepper, 1997. I think they just went to Division I at the time in 1996. And I stood in the end zone at Scott Field in Starkville watching Dante Culpepper and UCF take on, and nobody called them UCF at the time. It was Central Florida. But it's Central Florida, Mississippi State, Dante Culpepper. We had heard about this guy, and I just got acquainted with his stats and watching him. And then he comes to town, and Mississippi State won the game, but it was a fun game to watch. Yes, UCF. ACC, you should have listened to me a long time ago. Natural rivals right there, Florida State and Miami. This was right there for the ACC years ago, right there for them. And would have UCF gone to the ACC? Are you kidding me? Why, ACC, did you not see that? Why? Okay. So again, those are my selections from the Big 12. If there is a crumbling, a deterioration, a demise of the Big 12, I think Oklahoma State's the best commodity, followed by West Virginia, followed by Kansas State. But those are the three that I see. TCU, Dallas, Fort Worth, they are building both academic and football related facilities that are state of the art. So TCU, small school, their TV viewership coming off a national championship game run was horrible last year. There were like 270,000 people watched the TCU SMU game. That's a mid group of 5 TV rating viewership total. Kansas with basketball, there's a whole lot of options here. Here's another sleeping giant. Being in an NFL town, I think works against them greatly. But Houston, there was a great stat from about 10 years ago. Remember that 2015 Ed Oliver, who was the quarterback? Who was the quarterback? Ward, Derek Ward. The Houston football team with Oliver, with Ward at quarterback, Oliver, the great defensive lineman that was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. That Houston team that beat Florida State in the Peach Bowl, that Houston team, its roster all came within like a 30-mile radius of Houston. That's how many football players in Houston. Anytime I look at Texas A&M recruiting, I look at Texas recruiting, and then I can look at Ohio State recruiting. But in terms of concentration of players, oh my word, I see Katy, Texas, Richmond, Texas, all these towns that are right outside of Houston. They are producing, they're like 4-star cornerbacks and like gathering at the bus stop at every corner within a 30-mile radius of Houston, Texas. It's unbelievable. If you live in a development, you probably live within a mile of like 12 4-star, 5-star defensive linemen and cornerbacks and wide receivers. It's unbelievable. Houston, Texas. But I think with a pro team there, nobody cares about Houston football. It's like the SMU situation. It is like the SMU situation. When Houston becomes really good at football, you know who's watching their games? Just big college football fans across the country. That's who becomes interested in Houston football. Like we just start watching, David Klingler or Andre Ware, or like I mentioned, those Ward Oliver teams from about 10 years ago. Their ratings jump a little bit because we're watching them, not because Houston's watching them. What do we got here from John? The ACC thought they were going to catch up with the SEC and the Big Ten by getting a conference network, but neglected to address the quality of their on-field product. If you look at the 2016 ACC season, you can make an argument that the ACC in 2016 was the best conference in America. Now, I don't believe that, but I'm telling you based on the results on the field. And ever since then, the conference has Miami. What is Miami's problem? That's a docu-series. I could go on and on about that, and have in other places gone on and on about how Miami doesn't win. Miami is winning 57% of its games since just basically say in the last 20 years. 57% of its games. Miami is basically Purdue. On the field, Purdue. Now, they certainly have an opportunity to be so much better than that, of course. Their brand's bigger than Purdue. More people watch them play. Their recruiting's getting to an elite level, all that. But you're just talking about on the field. Miami has been Purdue. They've been Texas Tech. They've been Georgia Tech. Yes, Roger Dodger and Todd. Ouch, but it's the truth. I posted a video on the Miami channel a couple years ago, and their fans did not like it, but I have to say I gained a huge level of respect for at least the Miami fans that watch our channel and show over there, because there was maybe one comment out of 80 or 100 that said, Mark, you're a hater, you're a jerk, you don't make any sense. All the rest of the comments were basically saying, Mark, this hurt. I did not want to see this. This was tough to watch. But you know what? You brought the facts. This is the truth. This is the reality. And the reality at the time, and this number has probably grown a couple more as of a couple years ago, since the last time Miami finished in the top 10 in America. Just let this statistic just soak in. The last time that Miami finished in the top 10 in the country, which was either 2003 or 4, there have been 43 schools in America that have finished in the top 10 in the country. 43. I'm not going to make this a Miami show, but yeah, they have been the major disappointment. They joined the ACC in 2004, and who could have forecasted in 2004? They had just fielded some of the greatest teams in history. They, of course, lost the 0-2 championship game. And yes, they did lose the 0-2 championship game, but they were still really good in 03 and really good in 04 into 05. That's when it had already started to drop from elite level, but they were really good football program teams in 03, 04, 05. But who would have stated then that we would be here 20 years later and Miami would have 0 ACC championships? That Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Louisville. No, I apologize. Louisville did not win the ACC championship. They were still in the American Conference when they beat Wake Forest, who won the ACC champion. Wake Forest has won the ACC and not Miami. Of course, Miami's gone to 1 conference championship game, so has Duke. Georgia Tech's gone to 3 or 4. Boston College has come much closer to winning ACC championships. They went to 3 championship games. All right. So we looked at the Big 12. And I am hoping that the Big 12 survives. This is what I would love to happen, is that the ACC survives, the Big 12 survives, the SEC and the Big 10. And maybe those conferences looking at the ACC and the Big 12 become a little bit more fortified through the likes of acquisitions of Boise State, Tulane, Memphis, something that might help them a little bit. It really doesn't help them at the high end level. And that's the problem here, is that the Big 12 is never going to win a national championship as it's currently configured, and it's not going to change. And I would make that bet with anyone that conference is not winning a football national championship ever again. But it's a fun conference, and they'll make money, and they'll have a ton of games on FS1 and ESPN2. They'll have a limited number of games on Fox. and ABC, but they will have those as well. So yeah, I know forever is a long, long time. So I just gave somebody a lecture the other day on you don't say never, you never say always, you never listen to me, you always do this. You shouldn't say that. I guess the reason I'm confident in saying that, and I would love to be proven wrong, I would love Utah to go out and win the national championship or Oklahoma State. And if there was still the configuration of a 14 playoff, I wouldn't make that statement. But the winner of the Big 12 is going to have to win 3 consecutive games. Okay, so and check it out. It's funny because check it out here. That's probably Oklahoma. Check that. Yeah, Oklahoma State, Utah, Kansas State. I'm more confident that they will be long-term better football programs year to year. They're more of a proven commodity than Colorado. But if you're just going for the gusto, going for who's the wild card, if you asked me who's going to win a national championship out of the Big 12, if you said there is a school that's going to win the national championship out of the Big 12 in the next 10 years, I would say Colorado. They're the wild card. But if you asked me who's going to have the best record in the Big 12 over the next 10 years, I wouldn't select Colorado. But they have the best chance to get lightning in a bottle with recruiting and with transfers and with Dion and get to form some kind of all-star team for 1 year and possibly pull it off. And again, I don't like the prediction that I'm making about the Big 12, but its last national championship among the schools that it currently has is BYU in 1984, and that is an extremely tainted national championship. It's an abundantly tainted national championship. So their last national championship before that, I believe, is Oklahoma State in 1945. And the conditions under which those teams were winning national championships were just completely different. They played 9 games. If we looked at Oklahoma State's schedule in 1945, I'm guessing it was very marginal, and they probably just won all their games and claimed a national championship. So if the Big Ten and the SEC get their way and these buys are relegated to the top 2 teams, which are going to come from the SEC and the Big Ten, then that prediction that I just made about not winning a national championship is going to be even more secure. We got Fong Wei here. I appreciate that comment. That's a great one, and that's a great comeback. And TCU will be able to hold that over Michigan and the Big Ten champ forever, unless something happens in the meantime, which, considering TCU's viability of probably being on the national scene and going to playoffs, it's not going to happen. All right, folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We've got an Amazon link. It's in the description section of all the videos. Please use it. I am telling you, try it once. Just try it. You're still going to be signed up in your account through Amazon. So you're still going to get credit for whatever you need to get credit for. You just use the link that we provide in the description section of all the videos. It's right there, Amazon in caps. Grab that link. And if you spend $10 at Amazon, you're going to send a buck my way, maybe 80 cents. So we appreciate your contributions. That's one way you can contribute to the channel without taking a penny out of your pocket. Actually, the other way you can do that is through Aura. And I will play the Aura video here. But the Aura cybersecurity. So you want to secure your identity. That's a scary thing. I've been through it, had all the bells and whistles and all the alarms go off, and let's secure the identity, the business, everything going on. So whether you think you've got a little or a lot, understand that you do have family members, most likely, that are connected to you in some way, and you have your identity, and that's about the worst thing. That's worse than losing thousands of dollars, your identity being at risk. So go to Aura, put in the promo code Mark Rogers, and we will let you know here in just a month where you can use our link. But it's basically the Aura link that we have in the description section of all the videos, and just use the link that we provide, and you get 14 days for free. So you can try it out, and then you just cancel it if you don't like it, but try it out. Terry, you spend about $800 a month on Amazon. Well, Terry, please use the link. We would appreciate that. That would be phenomenal if you would do that. And I know it's something that you guys, you get done watching one of my videos, you move on with your life, you forget about it. So please put it somewhere where you will remember it. All right, folks, thank you so much for being here. I think we have done enough damage, but of course, we will continue this conversation at another time. There will be more ways to break this down. We will continue to do so. We will continue to throw you some models of, hey, look at this situation, look at this outcome, look at this landing spot, and what that could possibly look like. What do you think of that? So once again, check out the one that I posted a few days ago of the SEC, the Big 10, and the Big 12 with 24, 24, 24. I'm not saying that's the way it's going to land. I'm not making a prediction, but it is a way to look at it. And it, I think, most effectively maintains the rivalries. All right. Appreciate you being here. Rob, Roger Dodger, D-Rock Irish, Terry, Aaron, thank you for being here. Dave's here, of course, and so many others. So thank you for being here at the Voice of College Football. Tell a friend, hit the like button on your way out, and continue to support the Voice of College Football, because without you, we are not here. We'll see you later in the day. We've got Michigan podcast we're recording this afternoon with Steve Dace. We've got also the Iowa show. That's at 5:30 Eastern time. We've got the Nebraska show at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And I am hosting Michigan fans, the Michigan Live show at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So we will enjoy that, of course. So again, this is only one of 4 live streams here at the Voice of College Football. So hopefully we will be connecting throughout the day. Iowa, Nebraska, Michigan live streams. And again, check out the Michigan podcast. We're getting together with Steve Dace here in a couple hours. Right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you. See you next time. Most of us are on the internet pretty much all the time. It's fun. You get to socialize, you get entertained, and in this day and age, it's pretty much necessary. And even if you're one of those people that's not on the internet all the time, you know what is? Your personal information. And there are people out there trying to hack you all the time. They want your email address, they want your phone number, they want your place of employment, and they want to do bad things with it. There's also fairly legitimate corporations and companies that want your information. They want it for marketing purposes. They're going to buy it, they're going to sell it, they're going to trade it. At the very least, it's annoying to you. It's a nuisance, it's aggravating. Your email gets cluttered up with spam email. You get robocalls all the time. That's at the very least. At the worst, it's a threat to your family, to your friends, to your personal information, to your banking, to your finances, to your security, to your safety, to your identity. It can be pretty serious. This video is sponsored by Aura. I got hacked and it was pretty obvious. This was about 8 or 9 months ago, and there were red flags all over the place. And I didn't exactly know what to do, but I knew I needed to do something quickly. I mean quickly. I researched 8, 10, or 12 companies immediately. I went all over the place. I asked people. I was online looking for the best company that could serve my needs and secure my information. You know who I found? Aura. And I'm glad I did. It was amazing. I contacted them. They got right back to me immediately. Their customer support is phenomenal. Their customer service is first-rate, friendly. They are detailed. They know what they're doing, and they do it right, and they will protect you. In addition to everything I just mentioned, they've got a password keeping service. They keep your credit score. They notify you anytime there's a possible data breach. This has happened to me a number of times. I'm getting notifications all the time when there's a possible compromise to my credit score or anything that I don't want. They've got a VPN that will allow you to browse the internet anonymously. It's amazing. And again, customer service support available 24/7. Click the link in the description section below and get 2 free weeks of Aura. Protect your finances, protect your information, protect your privacy, protect your identity. I did, and I'm glad I did. Aura, thank you so much for what you've done for me, and now for my Voice of College Football community.